Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Objective, the show where we do our best to apply principles of objectivism to issues all around us. And today there's a bit of a challenging one because we're going to try to answer a question: what is the left? And if there's one thing I think history demonstrates, it's that words like left, right, conservative, liberal are sometimes on the fluid side. So if it is possible to define what is the real left, we're going to try to do that today. And if I had to choose one person to help me, I know who it would be, and it's exactly who's here. A man who, I've given him so many lavish introductions, but at this point, he needs none at all. He's in Athens, Greece. He's actually in Greece, but probably not in Athens. We're not going to give away his address. Nikos Sotarikopoulos.
Hello, hi everyone. So today is one of these topics which is very difficult to define, because it's one of these things that we consider self-evident. So I've spent more than almost 2 decades of my life somewhere around the left, and that question never rose up, because the idea was, look, the left are the good guys and those who care about people, and the right is basically everyone else. So the daily objective today, actually we have 3 daily objectives. The first is to try and see what is at the core of the left. So this movement that has been around, let's say from after the French Revolution till today, is there one thing that defines it and gives it a continuity? The second question is there even a continuity between what we call the old left, like the Marxists, the communists of the early 20th century, and the new left, let's say the post-1960s left? And also I want to spend some time at the end with this theme that says this wasn't real socialism, which is the usual reply of the leftists when socialism fails in different places. And I want to claim there is a kernel of truth, I'll be a bit contrarian. So let's go and start answering all these questions. So what do you think is the number one characteristic of the left, if there is one? I'm going to throw 3 things in the table. 1 is egalitarianism, B is a critique of capitalism, and 3 is collectivism. So do you think these 3 are specific to the left? And do you think there is one thing that says, okay, that person is a leftist?
Good question. I think the one that's closest to the full definition is the opposition to capitalism, because I think the way they see it, and they're sort of right about this, is that kind of in a laissez-faire society, of course, capitalism is the system, which means every person can build a business and in some cases make astronomical levels of money and hire a lot of workers. And they're sort of they're here to overthrow the status quo, the way that I understand the left. So whether it's the opposition to free market capitalism, or whether they're speaking in the name of overthrowing systematic racism, or being for trade unions, they sort of they're here for the little guy. Basically, their premise, if the way that I understand it, is the status quo, kind of left to our own devices, the individual, the sort of either the minority, the member of a minority group, or else just the less capable, or just sometimes maybe even just a randomly selected individual, is left behind and is not either being oppressed or simply being left behind and not being allowed to enjoy what life has to offer. So speaking in the name of sort of individualistic premises, they make the case that the status quo must be overturned. That's why the left and conservatism are always going to be at odds. And what those words even come to signify, what issues, what positions they come to signify, is often shifting. But like the conservative is that which wants to kind of preserve something from the past and present, whereas the left, and sometimes called progressive, sometimes they've even adopted the word liberal here in America, they want something new and fresh.
It's very interesting that when I was listening to your definition, the image that came to my mind is Tucker Carlson. So you could find a conservative that actually agrees with these things. So let's try I will claim that egalitarianism, although today is seen as the call to arms for the left. So they're against income inequality and all that stuff. Now, as opposed to most leftists, I have read actually Marx Capital, probably 3 times, at least volume 1. So I'm going to explain to them Marx. And I will claim that actually the opposition to income inequality shows how the left today has diverted from its roots in the 19th century. So Marx, almost nowhere, if you do Control F, income inequality, Marx is not really concerned about that. So the left, at least at that point, they see themselves as one, let's say, of the 2 children of enlightenment and modernity. One is classical liberalism and the other is the left. And they say, no, we will bring forward the good cause, let's say, of modernity, but we'll do it faster and we'll do it in a scientific way. So of course the premises were all over the place, and we can talk about the morality and the problems in epistemology, but at least this was the idea. Whereas today we see the left saying that no, the problem is in a way morality and enlightenment, or at least the majority of the left. That's why we see them being hand in hand, for example, with environmentalism and with postmodernism. So I think there was something in a way revolutionary at the outset of the left, which has completely been lost. And then I would pick a second historical period of the left from 1917 till around the 1950s, the period around Soviet Union and Stalinism, where the left gains a lot of momentum in Europe, mostly through its opposition to fascism. So in many countries, the leftist is like the guerrilla hero, is the person who fought for the resistance, and it's also the person who is against the old, let's say, order. So still at that point, you can talk about the mostly working class or peasants movement. And then the 1960s come and the left completely loses its character. But I think I went on a rant there. So would you agree then that there was something, and I think Rand mentioned this in The Return of the Primitive, that the early Marxists at least claimed that we are for reason, that we are the true rational people, and you, everyone else, is on the other side. And this has now been lost.
Yeah, they were, in a way, they were for industry. They were for human life on Earth. You mentioned to me in another conversation once that some of the communists in the Soviet Union, I think, or at least one of them was saying, once we're done saving once the proletariat wins this battle, then we're going to conquer nature.
Sorry,
right?
I have the exact quote. I will read it. It's Maxim Gorky, who was part of a Prometheus, so to speak, Promethean group around the Bolsheviks, who were, let's say, the early transhumanists. And his quote is, once the class struggle has been won, Soviet humankind will be free to engage its final enemy, nature. And again, he means this idea of overcoming any man-made limits and even trying their luck with metaphysical limits. And what we said in the other discussion is, imagine reading this today to a leftist, they will freak out. They will say, oh, this is probably a crazy Trumpite environment hating. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. But yes, the communists and the socialists in the old generation, they were for industry, and they were speaking in the name of, human life and progress, and of course there's always that tribute, that lip service paid to the forgotten individual, kind of like the downtrodden, and altruism as well does that. Like altruism, the moral premise behind all of these movements, also pays sort of lip service to the happiness of the individual. If you read Auguste Comte, I'll ransplain that to people. He kind of appeals to people's inner feelings. He says, if you're just selfish, then you are going to be neurotic and unhappy, and you kind of won't know how to live. But if you have this collectivistic type of cause to work towards, then you'll find some inner peace. So he was appealing to people's happiness, and you see the communists and the socialists and maybe the progressives even doing the same thing in the old days. But around the time of the 50s and 60s, now you see humanity itself becomes the enemy in the eyes of the left. Now human beings are a cancer on this planet. Now the trees are the sort of forgotten individual. The trees and the bugs and the stratosphere or whatever it is up there that we're supposedly destroying. The ozone layer, sorry. I mean, I'm not a scientist, believe it or not, so I don't actually know what's happening up there and if we're causing damage, but those became the standard. The purity of the planet, the purity of every species other than humanity, those became the sort of cause to fight for and to defend from capitalism, from human progress. So, I mean, one could say that even the old school leftists, they were really also opposed to progress and capitalism because they went to war against these things with their ideology, but at least then they paid lip service to those things. And of course, that's changed now completely.
So the interesting thing is that the tragedy of the old left in terms of the piles of corpses and its actual anti-humanism when it was tried in practice, with the overt anti-humanism of the new left, in a way have the same root, in my view. In the one case, it's more on the level of ethics, that the individual is not the standard of value. And in Marx, the individual is not in the epistemologically the standard of value. He talks about class consciousness. He talks about false consciousness. Therefore, you, Rucka, cannot understand the world through your own mind. And no one can. He's not saying that's a common misconception. He's not saying the workers cannot understand it, but then we, let's say, the intelligentsia can. It says basically, no, capitalism alienates everyone. So, and the same happens in ethics, right? Like, it's not about your life, it's about the historical progress of the class. Now, with the new left, because hopefully they learned from the tragedies of Stalinism, they claim that, oh, now we're not going to sacrifice lives. But because of the confusion here, and because of the most direct attack to reason, I wouldn't be surprised if the result is equally bad in a different way. So that's why you see from the pile of corpses, now we've gone to the anti-industrial revolution, because in both cases, the thing that guides the system is wrong. The software is wrong. And this leads me to the next topic, which is socialism failed whenever it was tried. This is not a hardware issue. And as one of the funny memes said, if socialism failed if Germans couldn't make socialism work, no one can. But I want your commentary, because I know you are the guy who specifically kind of put specific emphasis on the philosophy, whether you think there is any philosophical continuity between the old and the new left, where it really matters, which is metaphysics and epistemology.
Well, I mean, again, I try to remind the audience often to take what you hear from me with a grain of salt, because like many of you, I'm a student and I'm here to explore, and it's the journey more than I'm here to just provide answers and such. It's important to differentiate, I think, between what the intellectuals are saying, like amongst each other and in their own writing, versus the sort of message they're sending out into the public, and the message as it's carried out through the arts, through various media, the way that ideas spread out into the culture. The intellectuals alone in their own world, they are narcissistic. I'm using that word loosely because I'm not a psychologist. They're narcissistic, power-hungry social engineers. And they, like the progressives, John Dewey, he's saying we are going to socialize these people. He is not paying lip service to happiness or any of that. He is saying we are going to socialize people, and various other collectivists. But how is the message carried out into the public? It said, this is for your own happiness. So even environmentalism, which is as anti-human as almost it can get, they're saying, sacrifice yourself for the planet. But the way that's expressed is saying, it's for your own benefit. It's for your children who you love. It's for the continuation of humanity, which you're part of. It's sold in a way. It's packaged in a way that's still somewhat selfish, because you cannot separate the word good from pleasure. Our earliest conception of good is, early life sensation. So ultimately it needs to be, morality needs to be presented to people in a way that appeals to them, even going back to, religion, Christianity, and heaven and all that. Okay, your question was, is there a sort of a continuity between the old left and the new? I mean, yeah, I think ultimately the difference between them, it can be dramatic in a certain respect. The old left looks intellectual by comparison to today's. The old left looks pro-human life compared to today's. But in another respect, the differences really are superficial, ultimately. I mean, they both reject reason in the individualistic sense. They reject real reason. They reject selfishness. And they reject, of course, capitalism, you know, taking it up to politics. They're just different attacks on capitalism. I love that you mentioned Return of the Primitive, or the Anti-Industrial Revolution, where I read it in my early 20s, and it was a very profound book. It's a collection of essays that Ayn Rand published. It was specifically suggested for college students. And if I recall, Rand kind of walks you through this process where she says, first, the anti-capitalists, again, paraphrasing here from memory, first, the anti-capitalists were telling the Americans it's for your own benefit to embrace socialism, but you'll have a higher standard of living. And once that became, but of course that nobody was buying that, because clearly capitalism was raising people's standard of living. And then it became, okay, fear of the Soviet Union, you know, better red than dead. The Soviets are going to kill us if we don't embrace socialism. But once that wasn't accepted by people, then it became about, you know, protecting nature from industry. So thinly veiled attacks on capitalism is ultimately what all of these things are. And once you see it that way, you can't unsee it.
True. And the last thing I want to say is something about the "it was never real socialism" thing. So there are many things to unpack here. First, it's very interesting because each and every kind of experiment that ever happened was not real socialism. The only ones that could pass the test of what was real socialism was defeats. So, for example, the Paris Commune crashed, the Spanish Revolution in 1936, the revolution within the Civil War, again crushed by the Stalinists and by the fascists later, and things like the toppling of Allende in Chile by Pinochet, or things like May 68. So things that were finished early. And my suspicion is this: the left loves a history of defeat, because if they ever win, they have to put their ideas on the test. And this will be a harsh reality. That's my first point. I have two very short points, and then I'll let you finish it. The second point is, I'm a bit suspicious when they say this was not real socialism, because if you build a society based on the principles of socialism or communism by a communist party of people who have been studying communism their whole life and were willing to give their life for that, I'm a bit unconvinced that if this is not the real thing, then what the real thing is. But here's the catch, where I want to cut them some slack. I think there will never be anything like real socialism or real communism, because no one has ever defined it. So Marx has been writing for decades. You can never find a proper definition of what his society will be. You can find has some loose ideas, like it will be a society where we're not going to produce or exchange value and things like that, but nothing specific. And this would make you very suspicious, right? But this is not something that they can tell to us. If they tell us, oh, you also say America is not real capitalism, here's the difference. Rand wrote a whole essay about what is the proper role of government and what real, quote, real capitalism will look like. So I can say that we can use that this is not the real thing, but they can't, because they have nothing to compare it with. And I'll leave the grand finale to you.
Well, it is true. Also, we can say, to the extent that capitalism has been implemented, we've seen wonderful results. But, you know, of course, this is not an economic argument at the end of the day, because the premises beneath it are what people really care about. They want to do the right thing. And as long as the left has the moral high ground, saying that, you know, altruism says we need to redistribute wealth, regulate those selfish businessmen, and, you know, and tax and protect the environment, etc., they're always going to win. My understanding of Marx is based on John Ridpath's lecture series on Marx, is that Marx believed socialism would happen sort of naturally, like history would bring it about in an industrial society, like a capitalist society would then, you would see the proletariat rise up, overthrow it, and utopia would come about naturally. And then the intellectuals after Marx, they would go to these, you know, pardon my language, ass backward places like, you know, Russia and China and Cuba. No, maybe that's a little harsh, but they would say, okay, let's bring about industrialization and then induce the proletariat revolution, like induce as though like inducing a birth when a woman is pregnant. Like let's bring it about kind of artificially. So they go to a place where that is not yet industrial. They say, let's implement an industry and then implement the proletariat revolution. Of course, it's trying to play God with something that Marx said would just happen on its own. But that's what you get with such topsy-turvy, crazy philosophies that have no basis in reality. So I don't know if that was the type of final word you were.
No, but there's something interesting there. One of the most famous Marxist historian, Hobsbawm, said something like, the biggest virtues, let's say, moment in socialist history is that at least it tried to industrialize the third world countries. Now, we could say it failed, but the problem is that today the left would claim the opposite, that we need to protect the developing world from industrialization. So we're in a very weird position where the old left that produced pile of corpses, in some ways, it looks more or less evil than the philosophy of the new left. Again, don't quote us on that, right? We're just trying to figure out here as well. That's not like, basically nothing what we say.
Don't quote us on anything whatsoever. Yeah. In fact, don't even record this, guys. We're deleting this. I'm joking, but you know, well, we can drive ourselves crazy all day trying to figure out where the left went wrong and where those guys went wrong. At the end of the day, it's about a positive. What are we for? And luckily, Ayn Rand was very clear in her writing. And if you agree with Rand, you've got a wonderful journey of clarity and a positive that you can advocate for.
That's a way to finish it. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. Tomorrow, there's an episode where we discuss Matt Ridley's new book with the author himself. So tune in and hopefully you've had fun, and tomorrow will be fun as well. Thanks from me. Thanks from Rucka. All the best. Bye-bye.